And like Lisa said, in the drawing stage, you really want to get the proportions right, because that's what drawing is getting the proportions right. It's not about outline or contour necessarily. It's about getting the shape of the head the right size compared to the shape of the torso, the skirt, and so on.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my dad's studio.
Hi.
So in my last video, we talked about Sorolla, and we're going to talk about him again today. And I worked on a zoomed-in painting of Fisherwomen, and my dad did the same painting. And what took me about 2.5, 3 hours on a couple different sittings, my dad takes about 1 hour. And so you're going to see side by side in this video a beginner's painting and a professional's painting from beginning to end, and kind of like what we were thinking about in the process of our paintings. Now, it came from a painting called Fisherwomen. We've zoomed in on this figure that has a great gesture, and I really wanted to practice how Sorolla suggested the light, thinking about form and mixing warm and cool colors into my painting and getting better at that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. I haven't copied a painting for quite a while. And I think it's really helpful because you get to kind of see what or how another artist sees things, how he simplifies shapes and uses color to suggest light and shadow. Yeah, I first saw Sorolla's work when I was in high school. Our art class in high school took a field trip to St. Louis. And there I saw one of his early paintings and was really blown away about how good he was. But then after art school, I saw a show of his in St. Louis in 1989, and they had, I want to say about 30 or 40 of his paintings, all the really large paintings that he did of the fishing boats and the cows in the water and the women in the water and the kids playing. It was really beautiful paintings, and I really learned a lot from that show.
Well, I think like he also does a good job at like honoring this is important work that they're doing, and they're just normal everyday people.
Right.
And he values these, especially I think the women in these paintings, but you see how he does that in a lot of his paintings where they're working on the boat, they're fixing stuff, they're bringing in stuff in the nets, or they're cleaning their nets. And he's kind of just making the everyday stuff like really beautiful in his paintings. And I think like the whole picture of all the Fisherwomen is really neat because there's nothing unique about them in particular, but he's making their work important and he's valuing them. And I think that's pretty cool.
Right.
So I appreciate that about a lot of his paintings. I mean, I know he was born in the time of a lot of the really good artists that I really appreciate in that 1860s, died in the 1920s. And in Valencia, Spain. But like orphaned at 2, so had a hard start. Kind of like a lot of these artists did, but went on to like do really, really well, even if the start was really hard for him.
He started his art education early at the age of 9 and had several instructors that he learned under. And at the age of 22, went to Rome and Paris and hit all the museums, copied the paintings, and also painted under some really good instructors at the time too. So very well educated. And at that time, artists really learned how to draw. And but I'm sure since at this time photography was around, he also made use of photography as a tool. Not overusing it like we tend to do today, but something that was there and he could use once in a while to compose all the figures.
Okay, here's my final product. As you can tell from the video, I started with a burnt sienna wash drawing. Try to do my best to get as much of the figure with the right proportions as much as I could before I got to the color and the painting. And as I did that, and as I started to add color and think more about form, I did struggle with this scarf, how the light was hitting the scarf and how it was very busy in learning how to simplify that scarf. So I started that over about 3 times. That was okay. That was a good learning time. This looked like a chicken wing for a little bit. And I was just trying my best to work on that to get it to look more like a human arm and hand. That was interesting how he had that like that. But anyway, the proportions, I still need to work on that. And as I got to the ocean, I was struggling there a little bit too because water is still pretty new to me. But I'm going to just ask my dad when we get to him. But I enjoyed it just remembering how to really practice gesture drawing before I lay down color. And I do think I learned a lot about how to keep things warm in the light, how to keep things cool in shadow. And I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really fun one to do. So what did we do? What did we do on yours?
And I started the same way with a burnt sienna wash drawing. And like Lisa said, in the drawing stage, you really want to get the proportions right because that's what drawing is getting the proportions right. It's not about outline or contour necessarily. It's about getting the shape of the head the right size compared to the shape of the torso, the skirt, and so on. What I liked about Lisa's that I did not get was just the size, just filling in the canvas a bit more. I could have filled up the canvas a lot more. That's a bit more impactful. It's just a, get it bigger. Don't do a small, tiny painting and have all the background, fill up most of the space. But after the drawing, going right to the color, I usually start with the darks first. The shadow pattern on the face, on the torso, the skirt, filling in the water. And speaking of water can be difficult.
Yeah.
In something like this, the water is just the background. It's there to make the figure stand out. So you want to really simplify it. Maybe 1 or 2 values in the blue of the water, 1 or 2 values in the foam behind there, but you don't want too many value changes because that's going to make it too important. Mm-hmm. Also, a value change from the bottom part of the water to the top. It can be just a subtle transition, which I don't think I did get, but in his painting, in the full painting, he's rendered the water a bit more. But when you zoom in and crop, the water becomes just a background that you want to simplify. But the full painting, with all the water in there, he's got a lot of color variations, but still keeps the values really, really simple. And again, also being able to look at his brushwork, how he pulls one stroke into another using warm and cool colors. So it was a really good practice.
Yeah, and I think what my dad's told me before is to not make the waves, just differentiating how you would paint a cloud versus a wave.
Oh, okay.
The foam of a wave.
They do look a little cloud-like.
Yeah, so I think this is really thick like what you might paint in a cloud. And I think I thought too hard about the detail of the waves.
Yeah, and the sharp edges make them jump forward. So softening these, for the most part, will keep them back in the background. And there's a little bit of hard edges on those waves or the foam as they come forward a little bit, but most of it's going to be very softened or very soft edged so that it stays behind the figure.
I did try to practice something up here that you've taught me before and maybe it was different, but I tried to paint a little bit of the atmosphere. Do you remember when we painted?
Oh, okay. The horizon
the
getting a little
horizon.
more towards the orange, orangish blue.
Painted that. And
Yeah.
you didn't paint it in.
No, I didn't.
No.
I just made it all water.
Anyway, so this was fun, and I learned a lot doing it, but I'm just going to have my dad help me with some proportions that I think are wrong. He's going to help me just draw over them what they could have looked like if I had thought a little bit more about measuring or thinking a little bit more about my proportions before I laid down the paint.
Okay, now here we are with the two paintings. And Lisa's here. What I was talking about earlier, proportion-wise, the head is pretty large. If you could see the photograph, the head is pretty large compared to the torso. And what I do usually is I'll take my brush and put the top of the brush at the top of the head, and then maybe my thumb at the bottom of the chin, and that's the size of the head. Doing this on the photograph of the painting, and see how many heads high she is, and maybe how many heads wide she is at the shoulders. And that just gives you, it gives you a quick idea about the size of the head compared to the torso and the apron here. And I had measured it earlier, and it was 3 heads tall, and you've got about 2.5 heads. So head's a little bit large, so just cutting in some here, and then the jaw line would be there as well. Of course, there's a tilt to the head, which I think you got pretty good, and that lines up this way. That's the line down the center of the face, and she's looking that way. Then the tilt of the angle of the eyebrow, tilt of the bottom of the nose, and then tilt of the mouth. And that, doing that kind of first to get the right proportion, shape or size of the head compared to the torso. Then the angle of the eyes, nose, and mouth. Then you can go in and start blocking in the shadow pattern. Same thing with the arm here. It's really about comparison, stepping back and looking at the original painting or the model, if you're painting from a model, and just flipping your eye back and forth and seeing the shape of like the arm compared to the torso, or the length of the forearm compared to the length of the head, something that you can compare with. Because too often we isolate an area, like isolate the arm and we draw it, and isolate the head or the scarf, and then it gets out of shape or out of size, and we get it too big or too small. So always stepping back and seeing the painting as a whole so you can check on the proportions. And I think the length of the arm is good. It's just cutting off a little bit of the chicken wing there.
Yeah.
I think, got a little too much muscle on either side there.
Yeah.
But just the size is really, I think, the big thing. The other thing would be, get rid of some of that line there. The values on the face, I think you have pretty good for the half tone and the shadow. And I think if you just added on top of that, looking at the painting, Sorolla's painting now, I'm just going to use yellow and orange because she has a really reddish orange or yellow orange flesh tone because of the sunlight, coming in just a bit lighter. And a little bit of alizarin because the cheeks get a little bit redder. So crimson and ochre. And just hitting that value there. And the same thing, I got a little bit too light for the nose, and I can start off with the idea of forehead's a bit more on the yellow ochre side. The cheeks and the nose are a bit more alizarin crimson and ochre. And have about 2 or 3 values of each to show the form on the cheeks. But it just needs that lighter highlight to turn the forehead around and the cheekbone and nose around a bit more. Maybe a little bit in here. And I'm exaggerating a little bit. It could be a little bit darker, but it's that extra value, the light or the highlight, and you got the half tone in the shadow. That'll make the form turn a bit better. And I think you handled the scarf pretty good.
Okay.
I think what's hard is like adding the red on top of the yellow, because it's thick paint and it's wet and it's hard to. So what I did was, after I got to kind of a basic shape with the contour, instead of blocking it all in yellow, I got the basic shape, added some of that contour of the red, and then chopped in just shapes of the yellow, and left a few spaces for just shapes of the red. In other words, I'm not trying to render it too carefully. I'm seeing the different colors he's using and just putting them in side by side, instead of blocking it all in one color and then trying to make the red show up on top of the yellow.
Yeah.
That's really hard to do. Now you do that in the flesh, like you add the highlight on top of the half-tone red flesh color, because it's going to sink in. But here you don't want that red to sink into the yellow, so you put them in separately.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of chop it. I did that a little bit in there. And because his brushwork is very loose. Now mine's a lot looser than his painting.
Yeah.
But I was just going for seeing what colors he's using and how he's drawing the figure, showing the action of the figure.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Dad.
Sure.